If you're looking for the best two-person tent, whether that's for sharing with someone else or a furry friend, or you just want a really roomy tent for yourself, I've got you covered with today's video. I'm gonna share with you what I think the best tents are in 6 different categories. My thoughts are based off of testing over 50 tents in the last 5 years with well over 300 nights spent in the backcountry. Starting with the award for the best ultralight tent, the priorities for this category, outside of weight obviously, are ease of use, space, and comfort. I don't care how lightweight a tent is, if it's not ticking those other 3 boxes, then I probably don't want to be bringing it out on trail. The award goes to the Durston X-Mid Pro 2. This tent has 2 features that make it stand out relative to the competition in my opinion. The first is the attention to detail. As soon as you get a Durston tent pitched for the first time, you're gonna notice that everything seems to be really well thought out, and then the construction is really well done. Things like magnetic door toggles in just the right place, or guy lines at the corners that are just the right length in order to give you enough room to pitch the tent properly, but not enough to get yourself into trouble. The second factor is that you get a lot of space for how lightweight the tent is. It's only 515 grams, has a 46-inch floor, which is quite a bit wider than a lot of other tents in this category, and allows you to fit 2 25-inch wide sleeping pads as long as you're using them head to foot and they're tapered. Just so you guys don't think I'm biased, for each of these awards, I'm gonna list one kind of negative that the TENTS has, because every product has its compromises. And with the X-Mid Pro 2, the issue is that for couples out there, it's probably not gonna be quite wide enough for you. I know when Steph and I go backpacking together, we wanna sleep facing the same direction, next to each other on our square, wide, really comfy sleeping pads, and we can't do that in the Pro 2. An alternative would be the Z-Packs Duplex. It's been one of the most popular thru hiking tents for a very long time, but I don't think it's quite as good as the X-Mid due to being a tiny bit heavier and then not as wide at only 40 inches wide. Well, the X-Mid Pro 2 might be tight for a few people. This next category, the best roomy ultralight tent, is gonna feel like you're in a palace. And the award goes to the Z-Packs Offset Trio tent. This tent, it's massive. If you are only 2 people, you're gonna feel like you have a ton of room for activities inside this tent. And if you are wanting to bring a pet or a child with you, then you're gonna have lots of room to do that with the Offset Trio as well. The Offset tents use extra poles at the head and foot end in order to pull the walls of the tent out and away from where your head and feet are gonna be, and it creates really nice vertical walls that really open the tent up a lot. And you get all that space and room with this tent with it only weighing just over 600 grams. The downside with the Offset is that it's not gonna be great in wind, so I'd only really look at it if you can't, mostly below tree line and in sheltered areas. A roomy ultralight tent alternative is the Durston X-Mid Pro 2 Plus. It has all the benefits that the Pro 2 has that we talked about earlier. It's just quite a bit wider and can fit 2 25-inch wide sleeping pads easily. You also get that extra space with only a minor weight penalty. It only weighs 35 grams more than the Pro 2, but that space comes at the sacrifice of footprint. This tent has a big footprint, and if you are trying to squeeze into tighter tent sites quite often, then it might not work for you. I'll have links to all the award winners as well as their alternatives down in the video description if you want to go check those out. The third award is the best budget option, and this is a really interesting award category because not only does a tent need to be on the lower side of the price spectrum, but I also want it to be easy to use and still a good all-around tent. The budget award winner is the Nature Hike Mongar 2. This tent costs under $200, weighs under 2 kilograms, and the standout features are that it's easy to use, it's kind of intuitive to set up, and sets up pretty quickly, and that it's spacious. So if you are taking this tent out with someone else, you can both bring 25-inch wide square sleeping pads and have tons of space inside this tent. As you can see, the downside with the Mongar 2 is that it's bulky. This is the tent without the tent poles in it, so it takes up quite a bit of space in your pack, but worth it if you want to be saving a penny and getting a good solid tent. An alternative is the Durston X-Mid 2-person tent. So compared to the Pro versions of the X-Mids, this one is not made with Dyneema, it's made with Sil Poly, and it's a double wall tent. It costs a little bit more than the Mongar at $280, but you drop your weight pretty much in half. It's a trekking pole tent, so that may kind of intimidate people a little bit, but let me just tell you that I've been using trekking poles for a while now, and once you get used to them, they set up really easily, and I've ended up liking them more than traditional tent pole tents. We're on to the best freestanding tent awards, and we're gonna split this into two categories as well. Just the standard best freestanding tent award, and then the best roomy freestanding tent award for people who just want palaces when they're out in the backcountry. With a freestanding tent, you should be able to set it up without using any tent stakes, and then also be able to move the tent by just picking it up, moving it somewhere, and then staking it down. Both of the winners of this category are also just good all-around tents. The winner of the best freestanding tent is the Nemo Dragonfly 2-person tent. This tent just has a lot going for it, and I think is one of the most overlooked tents on the market. It's the lightest fully freestanding tent that I've been able to find at 1,200 grams, fairly affordable at $500, and then has a couple other features that make it really performative when you have it out in the backcountry. The first one is the Osmo fabric that Nemo has made the fly out of. The Dragonfly uses Osmo fabric for the fly, and that has a couple big benefits. First of all, it's quite durable, and then second of all, it doesn't stretch or sag when it's wet like tents made with a nylon fly do. That's a big deal if you're in stormy conditions where the tent fly is wet and is very windy, because if you start getting that stretch and that sag in the fly fabric, then you lose a lot of structural stability of the tent. The second thing that the Dragonfly really has going for it is its storm worthiness. It has a lot of stakeout points and a lot of guy out points. I've had this tent in some pretty significant wind right on the shore of the Pacific Ocean, and it was able to just shrug that wind off no problem. Out of all the tents that I've ever used, I would say that the Dragonfly is probably the one that I would trust the most in really windy conditions. Another benefit is that you can fit two 25-inch wide sleeping pads in here, which is pretty crazy for how lightweight it is. But the downside is that you have to use 8 stakes in order to set it up, which is 2 more than most tents in this category. The best roomy freestanding tent is the Marmot Tungsten Ultralight 3-person tent. This tent has 3 things going for it. It's made with sil poly material, so it doesn't sag or stretch when it's wet. It's extremely roomy for only weighing 1,700 grams, and then has a ton of awesome ventilation. This tent deals with condensation better than most tents out there. The downside with this tent isn't that it's bulky. It actually compresses down to be pretty compact. It's that it doesn't have an all-in-one or fly first pitch. So you have to pitch the inner first and then put the fly on over top. And if it's raining, that can be a bit of a pain because as you're setting up the tent, you're getting the inner all wet. For both tents, the types of trips that I'd be bringing them on are trips where I'm on really rocky ground or sandy ground and just want the tent to be able to have structural stability without having to stake it out. Or if I want a tent with a smaller footprint. Both of these tents, for how big they are, have a smaller footprint than a similar sized trekking pole tent. Before we talk about the best all-around tent, we have to talk about this tent, which is the tent that's getting the award for the best family tent. So if you're trying to go backpacking with your partner and then a couple kids or a couple dogs, then this is the tent I think you should really be looking at for those trips because it's spacious and it's quite lightweight for how much space you get. It's the REI Half Dome SL3 Plus, and inside this tent you can fit 2 25-inch wide sleeping pads and then 2 20-inch wide sleeping pads and still have room to spare. That's a trail weight of 2,200 grams, which is a very manageable weight to split up between 2 adults. There's 2 kind of negatives with this tent though. First of all, its bulk. It's a quite bulky tent. The second downside is that it uses a nylon fly, which will sag and stretch when it's wet. This is the only tent on the list that uses a nylon fly, so it goes to show how much I like tents that are made with sil poly or some sort of hybrid material like the Nemo Osmo fabric. The nice thing about this tent is that not only is it an option for backpacking if you are taking a family, but it also makes a great car camping tent for 2 people and can be used as a base camp if you're doing that kind of trip. It's just a great all-around versatile tent that's gonna get the job done in a lot of different scenarios. An alternative if your family is to use 2 two-person tents. This is an approach that I've seen a lot of people do and it's worked really well for them. So think of that as an option. You don't need all the family in one tent. You can split it up, and this might be a good option for down the road when you want to put both kids in one tent and then you and your partner in another tent, or some sort of whatever combination you want. You get a little bit more versatility with the 2 two-person tent system. I've been thinking about this a lot recently because my wife and I are having our first child in about a month and a half here, and I'm wondering, are we gonna have a second one? Am I gonna have to figure out how to fit 4 people in one tent or 4 people in 2 different tents? It's a lot. Parents, I feel ya. Now on to the award for the best all-around tent. The best all-around tent needs to be a good weight, it needs to be well priced, easy to use, protect you from the weather, and spacious. If it doesn't tick all those boxes, then it's not a good all-arounder. The winner in this category is a tent that we've already seen. It's the Durston X-Mid 2-person tent. So this is the double-walled sill poly version. That's only $280 and just over a kilogram. It's just a phenomenal all-around tent and the tent that I recommend for most people out there. We've talked about a lot of the benefits of this tent already, but a couple that I haven't mentioned yet are that because it's sill poly, you can just stuff it into a stuff sack. You don't have to be folding it and rolling it and all that kind of stuff, which makes putting it away really nice. Another nice feature is that the fly separates from the mesh inner, so if it has been raining or if you have a lot of condensation, you can separate the inner and the fly, store them separately, and not have the inner getting all wet. When the inner is attached to the fly, it also pitches as an all-in-one pitch, so the fly protects the inner as you're pitching it, which is really nice on those rainy days. The one downside, other than the fact that trekking pole tents may not be as intuitive for first-time users, is that it is a little bit tougher to set up on uneven ground just because of the way that the setup needs to happen. Go watch Dan Durston's video about it if you're interested in this tent. But you have to get used to setting it up on uneven ground in order to set it up properly. The best all-arounder alternative or runner-up is the Nemo Dragonfly that we already talked about. Like I said, a lot going for it, just a great all-around tent. If you're looking for the best sleeping pad, go check out my 2024 Sleeping Pads Awards. Based on my experience, I go over what I think are the warmest sleeping pads, the best ultralight pad, the best all-arounder, and the best budget pad.